Good evening, everyone. This is Congregation Va-Dor, and it is July 6th, Tuesday evening. Chat with Rabbi Barry, and we have special guest, BJ Saul, who is the leader of Congregation Beth Adam, Humanistic Judaism. We're going to be speaking about two parshas, a double parsha that is this week's Shabbat portions, Mattot and Maseh. And then we're going to talk about a little bit about humanistic Judaism and what it is and how it relates to what we do and how it differs possibly. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rabbi Barry.
Well, thank you very much, Sharon, for orchestrating this discussion. And this is a real pleasure for me, because I have an ideological soulmate on the Zoom with us, BJ Saul. Very often I have people that I disagree with. Sometimes I have people that I agree on certain things, but BJ and I have known each other for quite a while, and I'm a great fan of her congregation, Congregation Beth Adam, the House of Man, or human beings. And I've been involved in some of their activities, and I'm a great fan of humanistic Judaism. So I'm really excited to have her here so she can share with us a little about humanistic Judaism, and then why it's so important to have a rational approach to religion. So I told BJ I'd kind of carry the ball as far as the Torah reading and the explanation of the Torah passage. And then if she'd like, I'm sure she'll probably have something to say after I give some thoughts about the passage. And then we're going to launch into really whatever you like to talk about, but our topic is about the need for a rational approach to religion. So this passage is a lot of fun. It's Mattot, Maseh, it's a double passage. The Torah is divided up into 52 chunks so that there's a passage for each week. And once in a while you get a double passage. Sometimes you get some passage from somewhere else if it's a holiday. This one is a double one. It's Mattot and Maseh, or sometimes pronounced Maseh. I'm going to share some of the highlights because I'm really anxious to speak with BJ about other issues, but the Torah reading is very interesting, and I know she's going to find it so as well. So let me tell you what's going on. The story takes place with the Jewish people in the desert, and the 40 years of wandering is just about up. In the Torah, they tell you a lot about the Exodus and then the first year after the Exodus. And then the 40 years is pretty much skipped over. And all of a sudden, you're like the year before they're about to enter the promised land. Those other like 38 years, you don't really hear much about it. Basically, I can sum it up very simply. The people are complaining bitterly to Moses all the time. Where's our food? We're tired of this manna. We don't have anything to drink. We don't have any water. We're outnumbered by the enemy. We're never going to make it. We should have gone back to Egypt. Why did you take us out of Egypt? Things were so good there. And now we're going to die in the wilderness. So that was apparently going on for about 38 years. But actually, it's largely silent. But now we're approaching the promised land. We're getting close. And then you have some fascinating developments. Now you will find out that BJ and I have very similar ideas, perhaps as close to identical as you could get, I would say, regarding the Torah. A lot of people give me a hard time. BJ, I guess you don't get this at your congregation like I do. Everybody's pretty much on the same page. There is no God. So God couldn't have written the Torah because God doesn't exist. It's very simple. There's really not much room for argument or discussion. Very simple. In our congregation, we started out Reformed. And then the congregation voted to become a congregation that interprets Jewish tradition through science and reason. So it's an evolution, and that means that through science and reason excludes a supreme intervening being who defies the laws of science. So I get in at Va-Dor, some people were very troubled by all this. Hey, you know what? This thing was only passed 5 years ago. I need a little time to get used to this. So don't rush me into all this stuff. Or, I'm not really into all this stuff. You don't need to tell me that God didn't write this. I like to think he did write it. And of course, at Va-Dor, just like a Congregation Beth Adam, everybody can believe what they want. If you belong to Beth Adam and you want to believe that there is a God, I suppose you can still be a member. They're not going to toss you out, but the ideology would be different. Similarly, at Va-Dor, you can believe anything you want. You could be a Christian, you could be an atheist, you can be an Orthodox Jew, and you can belong to Va-Dor. It's just that the philosophy of Va-Dor is to interpret the Torah through science and reason, which, as I understand it, leaves out a supreme being. So this is what happens in this passage. According to the Torah, which I take as literature, mythology, whatever, some of it's very accurate, but there's 2 tribes. They're named Gad and Reuven, or in English, Reuben. These 2 tribes, they say, we are cattle people. They were the first cowboys. We've got a bunch of cattle. And we're going to enter the promised land, but before we get in, on the safe side, on the other side of the Jordan, where we don't have to fight over, it's kind of like open country. This is cattle country. This is great for cattle. So you know what? We don't really want to cross over. We're happy right here. You guys go ahead, and best of luck to you. We hope you do well, but we'd like to stay here. And Moses is outraged. He says, I've been dealing with people for 40 years who have tried to discourage the Jewish people, telling them you're never going to make it, you can't get into the promised land, trying to bring them back to Egypt, trying to divide us up. And now you guys come along saying, hey, you know what? We don't want to enter. We're going to separate ourselves out. You go and we'll stay behind. Moses is really outraged. That is going to just destroy the unity that we need to get in. Everybody has to do their share. So they say, okay, here, how about this? I'll make you a deal. We will go in the advance force with you. We will go commit genocide with you as God's ordering us to do and expropriate the natives from their land. We'll do all that. Apparently that moral dilemma isn't really an issue. That doesn't really come up. So we'll go ahead and engage in genocide according to God's command. But afterwards, we want to come back and then we'll settle this land. But before they get to that point, they were like, how about if some of us go over and some don't? So basically what Moses was upset about was, he said, so basically what you're saying is, you want to skedaddle with your cattle while we have to go off and fight. I don't want to hear any more of this prattle. So if you keep talking like that, you'll be up the Jordan without a paddle. So basically that's what he's saying. So they reached a compromise, and that's what happened. The people went over and then they were able to come back. So it's worked out. Now we can't extract a moral from the story. Just like with Aesop's fables or anything else, it doesn't have to be literally true to make a point. And the point is that the Jewish people must be united. We must all work together in order to accomplish a goal. Now, in this case, the goal might not have been that salutary, but according to Jewish tradition, it was a worthy goal, even though it did involve genocide. Now, some of you may think, Rabbi, I get this all the time also, you're being a little harsh. All right, the Torah describes things that had to happen. This had to happen for the Jewish people to have a homeland. And sometimes you got to do things that are a little bit mean, a little bit cruel, but that's just how the world is, and that's what you have to do. So there's nothing that wrong about it. If you think that, I want to read for you a little bit more from the passage, just so you get an understanding of what we're talking about. Because if I tell you, I don't think an all-knowing, all-good being wrote this, I want you to understand why. Because a lot of people, they give me a hard time about that. They say, oh, you're being a little harsh. You know, maybe God did write this. How do you know? So I'm going to read a little bit from the passage. And then you tell me, if you think God wrote it. God spoke to Moses, saying, together with Eleazar the priest and the community's fraternal leaders, you must take all accounting of the men and animals plundered as spoil. Then divide the plunder equally, giving half to the warriors who went out to battle and the other half to the community. Now, I have to tell you, before this in Mattot, what happened is Moses is mad at the generals because the generals killed every single man in the among the Midianites, not just the soldiers, like every single male. But they didn't kill all the females. And Moses is really mad. And Moses said, no. You are going to get God mad at us because God wanted us to commit genocide and you left some people alive. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to kill all the women who have known a man, but the ones who haven't, you keep them for yourselves. And you don't really have to use your imagination to understand what that means, keep them for yourselves. It wasn't so that they could send them off to school and become educated. That's not quite what they had in mind, as you could probably well imagine. And so after that happens, now here we are from this, and Moses is giving them instructions. From the soldiers who participated in the campaign, levy a tax to God, consisting of 1 out of 500 of the humans, cattle, donkeys, and sheep. Take this from their half and give it to Eleazar the priest as an elevated gift to God. What that means in English is 1 out of 500 of the humans means human sacrifice to God. Now, as an animal rights guy, I'm not too crazy about the sacrifice of sheep and cattle and innocent animals, but maybe you think that's okay. They're just animals, who cares? I suspect that somebody besides me and BJ may be troubled by human sacrifice being ordered in the Torah. From the half that is going to the other Israelites, this is not the soldiers, it's just the general population. Take 1 part out of 50 of the humans, cattle, donkeys, sheep, and other animals, and give it to the Levites who are entrusted with God's tabernacle. What they do with these people and animals is left to your imagination also. Moses and Eleazar the priest did as God had commanded Moses. In addition to the goods that the troops had taken as booty, the plunder consisted of 675,000 sheep, 72,000 head of cattle, 61,000 donkeys, and 32,000 humans, women who had never experienced intimacy with a man. You might ask, how do they know which women never experienced intimacy with a man? And just when you ask the question, you start getting into how grisly this is. Now, I'm not the one who believes that we should think in these grisly terms, but if you are going to say to me, I think God wrote this, then it's important that you know what it is that you're saying that God wrote. I think it's patently obvious to anyone with a functioning mind and a functioning heart, this is not divinely written. And this part is not even close to being divinely inspired. And I don't think we do ourselves any favors by pretending that it is. I think the way that we grow as people is to be able to say what's correct and what isn't correct. Now, we interpret the Torah through science and reason. Let me give you a little thumbnail sketch about the difference between religion, traditional religion, and science. Science says that you must be skeptical about everything. You don't believe anything unless there's evidence. And if the evidence that you believe turns out to be wrong, you have to say, I was wrong, change your mind, and then you grow. That's how people grow. That's how mature people think. They're open to evidence and reasoning. And if they've made a mistake, they don't cling to it and say, I'm never wrong. I can't be wrong. I must be right. And instead of getting rid of their idea, get rid of the evidence. That's how science works. Traditional religion is the opposite. Traditional religion says God wrote the Torah. Therefore, there are no mistakes. Everything in it is 100% correct, and everything in it is 100% moral, which is horrific because it then requires you to justify genocide. If you don't believe it, I have discussions with the Orthodox all the time. We've had them with Rabbi Khan. A nicer guy you'll never meet, but he still will tell you that the Torah is true and that the divine goodness in the universe believes in genocide and requires it. He will tell you that. He has told us that. So it turns out that it causes good people to espouse some very bad ideas and very dangerous ideas. So the good news is that at Va-Dor, we don't use the classic approach to religion where everything in it is correct and we can't move beyond it. We interpret it through science. And just so everyone here understands the beauty of science, which gives us all these miracles like a car, a boat, a plane, a computer, a light, and a rocket to the moon. What's beautiful about science, it is not just a body of knowledge. It is a way of thinking. And it's a way of thinking that leads closer and closer to the truth. One of the main goals of Judaism, emet b'tzedek. Some people think that we should ignore the part about interpreting through science. That's just a throwaway line. We don't really need it. But that is the whole key to understanding Judaism rationally, that we appreciate Jewish ideals, take them very seriously. However, when it comes to the interpretation of them, it's through science, which means that any idea that doesn't comport with the evidence is jettisoned out the window. In my opinion, the concept of God, as described in the Bible, doesn't even come close to meeting the definition or the test of rational thought, so it's out. It's out. It could be replaced or thought of rather as a creative power that's in all, that unites all, and that is beyond all. That's a concept that I think even BJ can agree with, because she and I both started out as one cell, and now we're about 100 trillion. That's pretty darn creative. There's something creative going on inside of all of us and in this universe, and that's based on evidence, not wishful thinking. With that, I'm going to pause and turn it over to our wonderful guest, who also happens to be a good friend of mine. And in this world, friendship is very valuable. And I do value her friendship. And I do value her courage in being able to state freely, I'm a humanistic Jew. I practice what I preach, and I believe what I say. And so I'm going to turn it over now to BJ. Feel free to comment on the Torah passage if you'd like, on humanistic Judaism, on anything that I've said, and please share with us a little bit of your background and maybe even how you came to become a humanistic Jew. It's all yours.
Oh my gosh. Okay, thank you, Barry. I really appreciate it. And I do relish our friendship together that we've had for so many years. And our combination, combining with Va-Dor for all our social action activities, going out and saving ag reserves and everything else that we've done together. So I really appreciate that. With respect to the Torah passage, my background is I am an ordained ceremonial leader from the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism. And so that means I've gone through 4 years of actual coursework and study to achieve this title of Madricha, and which gives me all the rights and privileges of an ordained rabbi. I don't have all the knowledge of the rabbi, just the skills to perform a lot of the programming and life cycle events. And one of the things when you're talking about Torah, I'm just going to say from our standpoint is we know that the Torah was written by several rabbis. And if you're reading the Torah, you know Moses wasn't actually standing there holding the Torah and reading about what's happening and what he's supposed to do. All of this was written after the fact. Jewish history was oral until it was finally written down. So these are things that you have to take in consideration when reading the Torah. And though many passages have elements of truth in it, a lot of it has been embellished. And as a humanistic Jew, when we read these stories, we talk about what is the evidence, the science behind it, what are the archaeological discoveries that are there, what are books in other cultures, not just the Jewish culture, that support a particular story. So there's a lot of different ways when we read Torah to evaluate what we believe in and what we don't and grab it. But we do value what's in the Torah. We do look at it as historical text to a point that can be proven. We look at the idea of the need for writing down ethics and morals and values for a society to follow, which is very important and needed to come from a supernatural entity so that it would be followed. And every other culture at that time also had God or gods to direct their path because of so many things being unknown. So that's kind of how we view the Torah. Our Torah is not kept in an ark, sacred up on a bima. It is placed in a library, and it is respected and read using a yad because it is still an important book. But we look at it as a history book, not as a divine book that was given from God down to us and to follow exactly. And we also look at Jewish history in the sense that it didn't stop with Torah. Our history has continued up until today, and there's a lot of music and literature and poetry and authors that have continued our Jewish history. And so we just don't look at where the rabbi should just have stopped at Torah and Simchat Torah and start reading that over again. There's just a lot to keep going on. So that's kind of our take on the Torah. Were there any questions?
I just want to clarify a few things. Like I say, BJ and I have a very similar view towards the Torah and probably towards God and other things, which we'll probably explore a little bit. And I want to explore your views also and find out where everybody stands on some of these interesting issues. We've discussed them with Rabbi Kahn, had some very fascinating discussions that brought out some very key beliefs that we all share and some where we diverge. BJ says the Torah is history. I believe what you actually mean is that it contains some history. It's not like a regular history book. Some of it clearly is not history. Some of it's mythology. Some of it is legend. Some of it is poetry. Some is morals and ethics. And there is some history. But unlike the Orthodox, who just accepted all as true, we require evidence. So when we read it, we have to figure out, based on archaeology and history and internal contradictions, we have to evaluate what's accurate and what isn't. The other thing is, it wasn't actually written by rabbis, in that rabbis didn't come along on the scene until around, after the Torah was, while the Torah was being formulated, there were rabbis writing, but
It was
a
more,
lot of the,
yeah.
a lot of the Torah comes from priests who wanted to protect the priesthood, comes from prophetic writings who wanted to advance the gifts of prophecy, comes from people who were scribes who wrote for the monarch, who wanted to show that the monarchy had all the power. And then it was also redacted and edited at that point, perhaps by rabbis who had some influence. The point is that we don't really know the identity of the Torah, but it is all way after the fact. In fact, you might be interested in knowing, when is the oldest Torah scroll that we have? What's the oldest complete Torah scroll that we have? Many people think, it's probably about 3,000 years old. It isn't. The oldest Torah that we have is from about 1,000 years ago. It was like a synagogue in Italy where they got this super old Torah, and that's the oldest one, 1,000 years ago. We do have fragments, and we do have sections and writings that comprise the Torah, and we have incomplete compilations of those. But the oldest Torah, where the whole thing is intact, it's about 1,000 years old. And the scholars believe that the first Torah was probably written sometime around the year 0, sometime around that time, way, way, way after all of these predictions were supposed to have made. I will say one other thing, and then Rabbi Kahn is free to come in and offer a rebuttal if he'd like. But in the last conversation, I asked the question of Rabbi Kahn, and I said, extraordinary proof or extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, extraordinary proof, as you might recall. And I asked him, what is the extraordinary proof or evidence that the Torah was written by God? Now, he gave the classic Orthodox response. And the reason I know that is because I've had this discussion with many, many, many Orthodox rabbis, well, not rabbis so much, but leaders, teachers, whatever. And the response is the same, the prophecy. There's prophecy in the Torah that could only have come about through a divine being. Like BJ was saying, was historians say the Torah was written after all the so-called prophecies. And the prophecy that he cited, just like the Orthodox usually do, is the Jews returned to Palestine or to Israel. That's the evidence. Well, that was no evidence. That was written after they had already returned 3 different times, under the Babylonians and with the Egyptians and other times. So that's not evidence at all. That's not a prophecy. It's something that they're just relating what happened in the past, but they're retrojecting it back to the time of Moses to make it seem like it was a prophecy, which it wasn't. So there's actually zero evidence, no evidence. Instead of an overwhelming amount of evidence, there's none. Now, Rabbi Kahn did say he would come back. And so he's welcome to come back and to share. Maybe there's some other evidence that he has that we don't know about. But the other evidence that's given is that if you ask an Orthodox rabbi, usually what evidence is there that God wrote it? It says there were 3 million witnesses to God coming down and giving the Torah to Moses and speaking to the people at Sinai. 3 million witnesses. But again, that was written around the year 0. So they don't even put a date on it. But let's say 1,500 years in the past, they're saying 3 million people. Well, they could have said 500 million people. It doesn't matter because there's no way to verify it. That's no evidence at all because there's no eyewitness testimony. It's just something that happened a long time ago. And we know today that nobody really knows what happened a long time ago. Even today, we have trouble figuring out what happened 1,500 years ago.
And I'll say,
Go ahead, BJ.
okay, I'm just going to say too, when you talk about the Torah and, Mount Sinai, all that good stuff, there's no evidence at all, archaeological evidence, that that event even happened. There's no archaeological evidence of the Exodus, out of Egypt and traveling through the desert for 40 years. Where's the pottery? Where's anything that the bones of people who died, anything? There is no proof that any of those stories actually even occurred.
Yeah, when the Jews recaptured Jerusalem and came back to Israel, one of the first things they did, they had archaeologists go and dig up in the Sinai and dig up in these areas. And as BJ says, it's quite extraordinary. There was no archaeological evidence for any of it, for the Exodus. Now, you could say, well, after all that time, things disappear, no more skeletons, but it's remarkable, according to archaeologists, that there'd be no evidence left. It is true that we don't expect to see all of it, but you would usually expect to see something. But they did, they tried their best. They looked around and couldn't find any evidence to support it. So now that BJ and I have pretty much argued against divine authorship for the Torah, if there's anyone else who would like to speak or share their views, we'd love to hear them. BJ, let me bring it back to you and ask if there's anything else that you would like to share on this topic or others, and then we will open it up for everyone else to join in the discussion. Anything else that you'd like to share with us?
The only thing I would like to share, and I don't know if you've done this in the past, is discussing the need for our types of congregations that we both have, the need and the importance of that, because the most recent Pew survey that's out there, and I'm sure that if you discussed it with your congregants or not, is really showing a trend. And the trend of people, the Jewish community, well, most other religions too, are not coming to congregations. They are Jews by culture. And I don't know if I pull my screen away, if you still see me or not, if I can. But I had pulled up a couple of things, and I know I don't have screen share unless you gave it to me. I don't think you gave me screen share, did you? No, I don't have screen share. Okay. But one of the things in the Pew survey that I found very interesting was the fact that the Jews of no religion are on the rise, that they're now 27% who identify as being Jew, but not Jews of religion. And that has really increased in the ages of 18 to 29. So those are our young people coming up. And that's now 40% of them who say that they are Jewish, but not by religion. And the majority of Jews, 53%, say being Jewish is mainly about culture and ancestry, not about religion. And for that, I've just found that so important, because that's where the trends of who we are and the Jewish community, why I feel like humanistic Judaism and the door of Va-Dor's philosophy are so important to hopefully keep grabbing these people who are Jewish by culture. And within our movement, we had a whole big discussion. What do you mean by Jews of no religion? Because we're atheists, many of us within our group. So does that mean we're not religious? But we hold all of the life cycle events and we hold holidays, which is a religious kind of a flavor, but we don't believe in a God. So the idea of saying, how do you check that box? to say, are you a Jew of religion because we enjoy our congregation and our events culturally and enjoying our ancestors? Or are we not Jews of religion? So there was a lot of discussion, and we had no good answer for that when it came to the Pew survey. But um, I just found that very interesting because at least those who did answer were going in a particular direction.
I want to just comment on that because it is really sad to see. I do a lot of weddings. When I meet with a young couple, they always tell me what BJ's saying, almost always. I'm Jewish by culture, but I'm not religious. I'm not religious. And young people aren't joining. Sometimes the Orthodox do because they've been brainwashed to believe in God. And so but people who are rational thinkers, almost all of them say I'm Jewish, but not religious. It's very, very, very rare that I do a wedding for someone and the guy says, oh yeah, I'm Jewish and I go to synagogue. It's like, it would be shocking if it happened. And why is that? Why do they say I'm Jewish by culture, but not religious? Because what they're trying to say is I don't believe in God, or I don't believe in the God of the Torah, or I don't believe that God wrote the Torah. And they don't realize that Va-Dor is very interested in marketing what we do and letting all these people know, all these people who say I'm Jewish by culture, but I'm not religious, that there's a place for you in a synagogue. And by the way, BJ, I would have my take on this question. Can you be religious and be an atheist and Jewish? That's not even a difficult question at all. Religion comes from Lig. Lig means to bind together. Religion binds us together with the best in ourselves and with this creative power that's been going on for all time. And it links us together, it binds us together with our ancestors, with Jews of the future, with other human beings, and with all living things. That connects us up. So if you believe that there's something beyond yourself, and I'm not talking about a higher power, supreme being, I'm talking about other people, physical forces and laws that govern us. If you believe that there's something beyond yourself and that you care about something just beyond yourself, then you believe in tying in with that, then you are religious. And if you celebrate a holiday, you're religious. If you celebrate Jewish values, you're religious. If you celebrate Jewish ideals and try to make the world better, you're religious. You don't have to believe in a supreme being. It's irrelevant as far as being religious is concerned. I'm gonna open it up to everybody else. I want to hear what you have to say on this topic. So the floor is yours. Go ahead. Anybody want to weigh in on this? Harris.
Yeah, how big is humanistic Judaism?
Okay, we are actually international. We have, I think, we certainly have we have congregations in Canada, all across the United States, England, and even forming in Australia at this point in time. Um, we're still small. We still average, I think, in the low 30s as far as the number of congregations around. But we do have rabbis. We have a rabbinic programming, which is where I got my madricha training from, the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism. And I always said, if I can say it, I deserve to be a madrich. And but they train rabbis. So we have quite a few rabbis within the movement. Israel, we have a very strong presence in Israel. There's one of the leaders there. We have the dean of the North American side, and we have a wonderful female rabbi who's the dean of the Israel side, and she does a lot of outreach programming and rabbinics there. And we always said when we did the first ordination of a rabbi in Israel, which was a female, as you can imagine, a humanistic female rabbi in Israel, we got so much press about how horrible and terrible that was from the Orthodox, but she had such support from the community. It was fabulous advertising for humanistic Judaism, and now we have a lot of rabbis in Israel.
Do you also have Gentiles in your congregation?
Yes, we do. Congregation Beth Adam was formed back in 1992, and our first vice president and one of our founding members was not Jewish. He was a nice, tall, Swedish guy who was married to a Jewish lady, who they then got divorced, but that's another issue. And he just stuck with Humanistic Judaism. And so we currently have a member who has joined who is not Jewish at all. No connection to being Jewish, except she likes the humanistic component of it and the way we do our services. And we have quite a few interfaith families.
Very, very similar to Va-Dor, where we also had non-Jewish members. Some of them were very involved in our congregation and had leadership roles. And we attract obviously the same types of folks, a lot of interfaith couples. Anybody else?
I just want to mention one more thing. One of the wealthiest alleged Jews in the United States was asked if he was Jewish. He says, "I'm not a practicing Jew."
There you go.
And that was Mark Cuban, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks.
Yeah, that's the other common response, and how sad it is that Judaism, which is such an incredible religion, has done so much to benefit humanity and is the admiration of so many people. We can't even get Jewish people to want to say, yes, I'm Jewish. They have to say, I'm not practicing. Why wouldn't somebody want to practice this incredible religion? Unless we're doing something really wrong. There's got to be something really awful that the Jewish people are doing if in this day and age, we're portraying Judaism in such a way that the rich and powerful just say, well, I'm not practicing. I don't really believe in it. Something's wrong here. And I think that we have an answer. It just needs to be publicized.
Well, and I think also a lot of people will say they're not practicing. There's a lot of anti-Semitism out there that people don't necessarily want to admit being Jewish. And I also think that they don't know about us. And we're going to express your Judaism and be proud that you're Jewish and not believe in a God or a supernatural being who is directing your path. And I think that's why a lot of people don't join and become majorly part of a Jewish community and that social connection, because they forget about the social connection. Because in traditional congregations, there's a lot of do's and don'ts that you have to follow. And luckily within Humanistic Judaism, and I know with your congregation too, with Va-Dor, we don't have any musts. We don't have any you have to. You don't have to go into the synagogue area and put on a yarmulke and a talit. You don't have to do that. If you're comfortable doing it, go wearing the trappings, because it's their tradition and that's what they're comfortable doing. But we don't have a box outside the door that says and start throwing everybody kippahs and making sure that.
Is your service in Hebrew?
Go ahead.
Our service is in English.
Okay.
Because, we do sing Hebrew songs, but a lot of them are modified. And our memorial is not a yisker, meaning he will. We have a nisker, we will remember. So we take a lot of the traditional and we modify it. Our blessings over the wine and the bread do not use Baruch to Adonai, because we don't believe in Adonai. So we pretty much, like candle lighting is, radiant is the light in people, radiant is the light in the world, radiant is the light in Shabbat. The wine and the bread finish with the traditional, hamotzi lechem min haaretz and that stuff, or brei pi hagofen, but we don't start out, with the Baruch to Adonai. One of the things our founder, Rabbi Sherwin Wine, said, say what you mean and mean what you say, which is why we've gotten away from a lot of those traditional sayings and blessings and have modified a lot of what we do.
I attended his service in the Detroit area in Michigan. This is going back about 30 years ago.
I'm sure.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
What did you think, Harris? Was it Meshuggah?
I thought I was in a church.
So in Michigan, you thought it was Meshuggah.
Yes.
Emily had
Emily,
her hand
go
raised.
ahead.
Go ahead, Emily.
Well, I just was wondering, My observation is that society in general is disaffiliating, not necessarily Jews only, but many of my non-Jewish friends no longer go to church services. They may, again, culturally say they are Catholic, but more they will say they are Italian or Irish and not be religious as such. I was wondering if you have any statistics, either of you, about the general population feeling that religion is not playing, in America, is not playing as big a part in their life as it once did.
Yeah, we know for a fact that the fastest growing population are those who are non-affiliated. In Judaism and Christianity, I believe for the same reason. Because Christians also don't believe in God, and their problem is worse, because what they believe traditionally is even more insane, that God had a child and that you have to believe in the child. I mean, these things are just beyond any type of rational thinking. So Christianity and Judaism both are suffering major defections from people who don't believe any of it. Judaism and Christianity are different in this regard. I can be Jewish and have pride in Jewish culture, Jewish holidays, Jewish values, and Jewish everything without believing in God. For a Christian, it's more difficult because Christianity is really based around a religious idea of Jesus and being the Son of God and the Savior. It's a lot harder to be Christian without believing in God and the story about Jesus. Much harder to do.
So then they become Unitarian.
There you go. Then they become, exactly, they become Unitarian. By the way,
Exactly.
irreligious.
Or
I mean,
Baha'i or something else, right?
right. Well, in the socialist countries in Europe, there's whole countries where like nobody's religious, and guess what? Something amazing happened. They didn't go around raping and killing. It's incredible. People said, "Oh no, without a religion, everybody's going to become crazy. How are you going to get people to behave themselves?" And guess what? They behave themselves pretty darn good, because you don't have they're telling you that you can do all these things and I'm going to authorize it or it's okay. You actually have to take responsibility for yourself.
So therefore, the place of religion creating a group where people of like-mindedness, not necessarily focusing on whether there's a God or a not God, but maybe focusing on saving the earth or being a good person or feeding the poor, or to be the meaning of religion in the future. What do you guys think about that?
Well, let me put it this way. If all that being religious is being a good person, then we don't need Judaism. That would be a tragedy, because without any religion, there's really no, Judaism has certain things that go beyond being a good person. And Judaism is uniquely poised to fill the gap. You see, Judaism has certain belief systems that not everybody shares. We believe that within the human being, we're good people and that we can make the world better. We believe in pursuing ideals like truth and challenging authority and brotherhood and compassion. These ideals don't necessarily hold true for all people. Some people think, you're unrealistic with this compassion stuff. People are basically mean-spirited and people are selfish. Judaism says, no, we're not. No, we're basically good and kind and we can do better. So there's a desperate need for Judaism that goes beyond just being a good person. And Judaism also has ideals and holidays and celebrations that bring out all these good qualities. So look at Europe, what happened with Martin Luther. Europe transcended Catholicism. They didn't believe that the wafer turned into Jesus's body, and they didn't believe that you had to give money to the church to be saved. They didn't believe that. And there was a gap. And Protestantism filled it up, and the whole continent exploded in Protestant religion. The world, let's say America, is at that place now. The religious community, the traditional religions aren't working. There's a desperate need for something to fill the gap. And being a good person doesn't do it. I believe strongly that humanistic Judaism, cosmic Judaism, InspiRational Judaism, a Judaism that celebrates the mind and religious values and Jewish values, uniquely Jewish values, can fill that gap. And any congregation that knew how to market it and portray this properly could be phenomenally successful. And I think we're there to do it. And I also think Congregation Beth Adam can do it. And that's why I wish for great success for Beth Adam. I wrote a song on their behalf, and I support them, and I think they're doing great work. They don't have enough members, and I'm here to tell you that I hope that they increase their membership many-fold, because what they're doing is promoting Jewish values in a rational way, and we join with them. They're our spiritual soulmates, I believe. Who else wants to share a thought? Or with somebody here must disagree with something that BJ and I said. And we said some pretty radical things, so somebody must disagree. So who else wants to hear?
I also want to say, so many horrible things are done in the name of God. And I think that's also a scary part, where you feel like, you can be this bomber or kill somebody or whatever irrational thought thing. It's happening because God told me to do it in the name of God. And that's a really challenging. And of course, as you're saying too, Barry, when you talk about being Jewish, we are a culture. It's not just getting together for the holidays. Hey, we have food. We can go to our kosher deli. There's no such thing as a Christian restaurant or a Lutheran restaurant, but there sure is a Jewish restaurant. And we have our special music, and we have a language that these other religions don't. So we do have a culture. We were a tribe that came, we came about as from a tribal aspect, not from a religion per se.
Yeah, Jews have revolutionized the way people think. The democracy in America is based largely on Jewish values. The conscience of the world is based largely on Judaism. Historians and scholars have noticed that the world actually thinks in Jewish terms, and we have so much to offer. I do want to mention, we have Carol Garrett on the line, and she sent a message saying that the synagogues are not doing so well because they haven't provided the support system and acceptance of people, and because of temple dues. And I'm hoping that Va-Dor might change the structure of what we do to make dues more like a recommended thing rather than a mandatory thing. The board is also weighing in on this and considering which way to go. And the Va-Dor, by the way, we're looking for people who want to help become leaders. We have board openings as of August. And if you think that you like to help shape where we're going, if you think that you have some good ideas for how to do what BJ and I are talking about, promote this to the masses, feel free to submit your name to be on the board and to be a leader or to lead in other ways, even if you're not on the board. But I appreciate what Carol's saying. I will say this also. She mentioned something about sickness and death. Many people say that they believe in God because it gives them consolation when someone dies, and they believe in an afterlife, feel comforted that their loved one is going to be somewhere good and that they also will go somewhere good. I just want to share with you my experience and about the last 3 or 4 funerals. I call them celebrations of life that I did.
Yep, we too.
Okay, now there's absolutely zero evidence for an afterlife. Okay, let's just get this out of the way. And the whole concept makes absolutely no sense to me. But other people say, oh no, I believe in this, and it makes me feel good. Now here's what I want to report to you. In the last 3 or 4 funerals that I've done, somebody got up and talked about the afterlife and said, that Uncle Joe or whatever is so happy now. He's out with grandma, and they're out going to their favorite restaurant, and they're out, singing songs, and they're happy now. Every one of them had tears in their eyes of sadness, not joy, tears of sadness in their eyes. Now, let me ask you something. If you said to somebody, you know what, Uncle Joe and Grandma, they're on a cruise right now. They got awesome food and they're going to wonderful places. They're having a great time. Would you be crying when you said that? Or would you be ecstatic? The reason they're crying, I believe, and I'm totally convinced of this, is because they don't believe it. They're trying desperately to make themselves believe something they don't believe, hoping that everybody else is going to reinforce it. They're going to come up and say, oh yeah, that's true. They're trying to make themselves believe something that they can't believe. And so it doesn't make them happy. It makes them sad. If you were just to confront the fact how lucky I am to be alive, how lucky we are that this person lived 80 years and shared all this, how lucky we are to defy all the odds against our existence and we're here. If you looked at it that way, you could truly celebrate life. But when all of that doesn't mean anything and you're just like, oh no, it's over, but you can't confront it. It makes you sad. It's not consoling to try to force yourself to believe something you know not to be true and for which there's no evidence. So somebody's got to disagree with a bunch of things that we said. Otherwise, BJ, you and I aren't doing our job very well. And I know you are, because I heard you.
Go ahead,
All right,
Valerie.
here we go. We got Valerie. Valerie's not going to disappoint me. I know Valerie will not disappoint me, and she will share with us where she thinks we went astray.
Well, number one, I think that, I've said this before, you can be spiritual without being religious. We've had conversations about that before. And the spirituality can be in the context or in the format of a certain type of past religious experience, but it's not religious. It's more spiritual. You believe in human nature. You might believe in being moral. You might believe not stealing or not killing. I mean, this is almost universal. It's not really religious. It's in plants, water. You believe in all of these things that's come about, and that's being spiritual. For me, a religion in its early stages was something to gather, to form groups of people, for society, for people to have a common belief, because we didn't have the type of population that we have now. Okay, we had pockets of civilization that allowed.
Yeah, we're seeing conflicts overseas.
Okay, all right, whatever.
Go ahead,
We had
Valerie.
pockets
I muted her.
of common belief systems to form societies, to form pockets of support, pockets of similar beliefs. So it brought us together. But to me, forms is now a wall separating people. Religion no longer serves its original purpose, which is to bring people together. Religion now, in many instances, tears people apart. And that's why, I think religion in its, the millenniums, if you will, the younger people who have all this communication worldwide with the internet, it's immediate communication, and they're able to connect to people. The purpose of religion and pockets of similar belief systems are no longer necessary to be able to interact with other people and have common belief systems. So to me, religion in its original form, if you will, has really outlived its usefulness. The concept of culture
went ahead and increased this value of
in my opinion.
Yeah. And Valerie, I totally agree with you. I'm going to add one more thing. Religion was also necessary to explain the world in which the people lived in, because you had all these natural disasters. You had death. And
55 to 10, maybe I slated 15 now.
That were not explained. They didn't understand that we now have the science, and a lot of that information is, hey, we had a hurricane coming. All right, we knew it was coming. You see it one minute the weather's gorgeous, and the next thing you know, it's terrible, and then it's gorgeous again. You're in the desert, you've got a sandstorm coming your way. You know, they don't have the Weather Channel to go check it out and what's going on. It just happens. And so I think that it also is used to explain a lot of the unexplainable that we now can explain due to science. And so I agree with you. And again, like Rabbi was saying at the beginning, we change. When people say, well, how do you explain X, Y, and Z? And I said, I can't at the moment. But then 100 years ago, we couldn't explain polio, and you couldn't
So good for them.
micro
Birds are from around.
that we all have and use. So, I mean, science is always changing and expanding. And so I agree. The idea of religion right now is very dividing, sadly.
Also,
let me just, go ahead, Valerie.
Rabbi, oh, I was going to say that Sheila wants to talk.
Supposedly the Talmud was sort of a Rosetta Stone written after the quote unquote Torah, the 5 books, and in some discussions that we've had with Rabbi Barry, it's only 4 books because the 5th book of Deuteronomy really wasn't part of the Torah, but now it is. And at Hanukkah wasn't about the burning of the oil, it was about something different. I mean, at one point I was so confused, I didn't know where to go. I was looking for the spaceship. I was looking for the mothership. But the Talmud is supposedly a form of a Rosetta Stone, if you will. So my question at one point was, why is the Rosetta Stone or the Talmud not updated as we become more enlightened with regard to how the world works and how people think? So I don't understand why the Talmud doesn't have Talmud 2.0, you know, because we have a lot of very educated, learned people that could bring it more into focus.
And that's where I was saying too, our history and who we are didn't stop. We continue now into 2021, and it should be updated, and it should, not the Torah necessarily, but our history and who we are is definitely always being updated.
Let me just explain a couple of concepts. It wasn't just that Deuteronomy was discovered late and there were 4 books. All of the books, all of them were accretions that changed, were modified and added to the other. And the canonization, like which 5 we're going to use, or even which 4, didn't take place like that on Sinai. These were oral traditions that gradually were put together. We just know about Deuteronomy because it happened in such a stark way when they returned from the Babylonian exile. But all of the books were gradually cobbled together. Let me share something else as well. I agree with what Valerie said in this respect. She said religion as originally conceived drove people apart, did this and that. You could say the same thing about medicine. Medicine as originally conceived literally drove a hole into someone's head in order to let evil spirits fly out. They would drain your blood, which would kill you. But we don't get rid of medicine because its original conception was dangerous. It changes and evolves over time. That's why it's so successful. That's why science is successful. The originalists cannot do that because they say God wrote the Torah. That's why the concept is so deadly and so fundamentally debilitating mentally, because it says God wrote it. It can't be changed. There was right a Talmud that's going to try to clean up some of the mess. But the problem is that the Talmud also was written 2,000 years ago, and it's a step above, but it's got all types of problems. So Valerie, like you say, why can't someone come along and write Talmud 202? They did. He was called Maimonides. He lived around CE, and he tried to clean up that mess and fix it. And then other Orthodox rabbis came along and with Shulchan Aruch and other things and tried to clean it up. But now the Orthodox, they revere Maimonides like he was God. And so they can't change what he did. They have to try to clean that up. And now you have to study for decades, try to make some kind of rational sense out of the Torah, the Talmud, Maimonides, Shulchan Aruch.
Now, don't forget this.
And so you spend all your life studying ways to rationalize the irrational and to justify the unjustifiable, instead of doing what science does and just says, okay, this part wasn't true. This part is wrong, we've moved on. That's why a rational approach to Judaism is so essential. It allows us to move on.
Okay, Rabbi Sheila.
Anybody else want to share some thoughts?
Sheila Kivovitz wants to say something, I believe. So Sheila, can you unmute yourself now and say what you'd like to say? Sheila? Unmute yourself now and say what you wanted to say, please.
Not believe in the big lie. Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois. Congressman, thanks for being with us. Do you think
Sheila, can you ask your question?
watch those videos, or try to stay up to speed on various investigations? No,
Okay, let's go to someone else then.
Emily, go ahead.
Well, I don't know if you've been reading the chat comments that Carol and I have been writing, but I just want to mention something about death. A lot of religions were conceived to make the concept easier. I don't know who's interjecting here. The Egyptians, the focus, look what they could have done in life if they hadn't focused on death. I remember being in a church where during the Middle Ages, when there was no money, and they built gold chapels because it would buy their place in heaven. The idea, as you said, Rabbi, about celebrating life, because this is what's important. We can't focus on an afterlife, and Judaism does not even deal with that at all. But I think, moreover, for a temple to exist, it has to offer more than, and this is where I'm going to disagree with you, more than the intellectuality of the ideals. It has to offer some warmth and human support of people who aren't able or willing to deal with the intellectuality. And
Who are you disagreeing with when you say that statement?
well, I think maybe both of you focusing so much on the concept of the revised concept of Judaism. Boy, oh boy, I get it. And you know, I'm right there with you. But having it hammered over our heads all the time maybe is not as important as gathering and giving a hug. I'm just saying, I think that's what's missing in people not coming and participating.
Well, I think
I'm with you intellectuality, and
I think you may misunderstand me and BJ completely if that's your understanding. We are having a discussion about the theology of the synagogue in order to try to figure out why people are staying away.
Exactly.
We don't suggest for a moment that the only thing that the temple should do, or the only thing we need to do, is to talk about the intellect. That is as far from what happens at Va-Dor or Congregation Beth Adam as anything. I've been to Beth Adam. They're not a bunch of intellectual eggheads having a lecture. They're nice, warm, caring, loving people. Va-Dor is not a bunch of people having a theological debate. Va-Dor, when you come to a service at Va-Dor, it's happy, it's joyous, it's friendly. People are hugging, people are saying what's happening in your life. It's way beyond that. That's not what it's all about. What we're talking about tonight is about God and the belief in God. Obviously, there's far more in a synagogue than simply intellectual beliefs. But the focus of tonight's discussion is the why a rational approach to Judaism is important. Now, we could have had a discussion about why a social approach to Judaism is important, and we'd be talking about what the synagogue should do to reach out to people emotionally and that type of stuff. But that wasn't really the purpose of the discussion. It's obvious. Okay. It's obvious and beyond dispute that if any synagogue or any organization or anything wants to survive, they've got to be friendly to people, encouraging to people, supportive of people. That's not anything that anybody could possibly debate or dispute. Anybody else want to share some thoughts?
If anybody that's out there that we don't have your visual, you can raise your hand through Zoom by on the bottom. So if we don't see you visually, you can still speak if you'd like to speak.
All right.
And until we accept that,
BJ, you want to offer any concluding comments? Some thoughts?
tactics that are happening.
Well, I just feel honored and privileged to be able to be a part of this discussion, and I really want to thank everybody for allowing me to be here tonight, and thank you to Barry for the invitation to come to this. And I do agree that, and both of our congregations are so similar in that we're very Hamish, and being
Up in some places, obviously a lot of Afghan
family, because it's a family. We all get to know each other and check on each other if we don't hear from each other. And this past year has been challenging because I do agree with you. Getting together in person and getting that hug and that social connection is just amazing. And this,
when we were there, we were just basically to skip the
eating at a restaurant together just to schmooze, not intellectual, just to schmooze with each other. And that too is so very important. And then we join with you guys and we do a lot of social action as much as we can too, because that's also a major part of being Jewish and who we are. So it's very complex. But you know, what's the joke? You get, 3 Jewish together, you get 4 opinions, and that's so true. But I think
$1 billion by overpaying on car insurance.
the tree of Judaism, where we have our roots, which is our history and who we are, and the trunk of which is Judaism, which is our strength that holds us together. And then luckily for Judaism, we have all the different branches of who we are. And you to show and illustrate yourself of being Jewish. And for that, I think we're very fortunate.
I want to thank BJ for joining with us. I hope that we do a lot more in the future and really join together. I'd love to meet in the same place, do similar events, work together, because we're kind of outnumbered, and there's strength in numbers. I will say, and I don't know if BJ shares this view with me. I know some of our members don't, but to me, the greatest threat in the world is irrational religion. It's radical Islam committing acts of violence. It's fundamentalist Christians electing people who defy democracy and science and logic and common sense. It's people who are devoid of rational thought because their religion has trained them to believe on faith, not evidence. And it's very, very dangerous. And so I think we have a need to be intolerant of people who are using religion to divide and even for violence and to defy science and logic. If we don't understand science, this world will not last long. If we don't recognize climate change, if we don't recognize the threats to our planet, if we are scientifically illiterate and ignorant, this world is in trouble. And if people believe in a God who orders genocide, we're in trouble. And there's a reason why the right-wing Christians, Jews, or Muslims are isolationists, are intolerant of the rest of us, and often engage in violent acts. There's a reason for that, because their God is telling them. And I believe we have an obligation not just to promote what we do within ourselves, but to try to dispel irrational religion, and that's important. So I hope that we're gonna work together, and I'll share one more story with you. I think you've probably heard of, BJ, from, I believe it was Richard Dawkins who shared this view. It was a woman who didn't believe in God, and her parents understood that she didn't believe in God, And it wasn't a big deal. They just thought, okay, so she doesn't believe in God. But one day she came to her parents and said, Mom and Dad, I just want you to know I'm an atheist. And all of a sudden her parents went crazy and they said, okay, I understand if you don't want to believe in God, that's fine. But an atheist, that's terrible. And they've done surveys where they asked, who would you vote for to be president? And it's like a Black person, a Jewish person, a person who has a homosexual, a criminal, and then an atheist. And the atheist always comes out like dead last. And so what BJ is doing by saying, we're a humanist atheist congregation, takes a lot of guts. And I like people with guts, and I like people who are willing to say what they mean and to mean what they say. I think we need more of that. And as far as politicians go, I'd take the atheist any day over someone who believes in the God of the Torah or Christian scripture or the Quran. I'll take the atheist any day of the week. It's been a great discussion. I think there must be people who disagree a little bit with what BJ and I were saying, but that's okay. If you do, you have plenty of opportunities in the future to share with us. And I'll just conclude with this. It is really important that we get together and socialize. That is a key ingredient in religion that unfortunately has been missing since the pandemic. I commit to you that Va-Dor will do everything we can to get back into a building as soon as possible, maybe shared with other groups, but we will get into a building so that we can provide the type of comfort and socialization and hugging that we all miss very, very much. We will be doing that. I am in the process now of calling up every person in Va-Dor, not just members, but people who are members or used to be members, just to touch base and to say hello. I've been a little derelict in that because of a lot of other things going on, but I'm all caught up for July for my Shabbat. It's all recorded in advance. Got a little bit of free time, and I'm starting to make those calls. And those calls really mean a lot to me. And I hope that you'll join us on the Zoom, because on Zoom, it's not the same as being there personally, but join with us at 8 o'clock and jump in, and you can say hello and touch base and share some views. And if you want to challenge or agree with what BJ and I said tonight on any other occasion, the door is always open at Va-Dor. So thank you, everybody. Join us on Friday night, join us on Tuesday night, and Wednesday, the third Wednesday, I've already chosen a topic. I'm going to surprise Sharon right now. It's been chosen. We're going to talk about critical race theory. And we're going to get some good speakers. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, no,
BJ?
we have a different topic for that week. We have the education topic, which
Well, that's good.
we chose already. Yeah. That'll have to be
right
for the
in.
next month.
No,
And I also wanted to let everybody know that August 13th, we're going to meet again at the Fellowship Hall on Seacrest, 101 North Seacrest at 7 p.m. And thank you all for participating tonight.
I